Hey everyone, welcome to the Ceres podcast. I'm your co-host Stelios, the founder and director of Ceres. Joining me today is my great friend David Miller from Millers in Haxby for our masterclass series. In these episodes, we explore advanced frying techniques to elevate your skills. Today, David and I will break down the operational side of running a successful fish and chip shop. We'll cover essential training and development topics to help you enhance your business. Our masterclass isn't meant to replace traditional training programs. Instead, it's here to complement them and showcase the valuable work they do in our industry. Think of it as a deep dive into technical aspects with two industry insiders. Additionally, we'll be recording a roundup episode where we reflect on past discussions, address any missed points, and answer your questions. And let's not forget that we're going to be interviewing stakeholders and professionals from the industry too. We're eager to hear from you. Feel free to share your thoughts and suggestions in the Ceres podcast discussion group on Facebook. We aim to keep our episodes engaging and informative whilst tackling significant industry topics. Today's episode is brought to you by Ceres Online Store. Whether you need natural batter mix, Yorkshire batter mix, curry sauce, deep fryer cleaner, natural degreaser, or our new orange chipping baskets, Ceres has you covered. Order today from ceres.shop for free mainland UK delivery. We also ship to UK Isles and selected European countries via our online store. If your country isn't listed, please contact us for alternative shipping options. Stay connected with us on social media and subscribe to our mailing list through the episode show notes. If you love what you hear, please share our podcast with others. And if you're feeling generous, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Now let's dive into today's masterclass with David Miller. I hope you enjoy this episode. We're moving fast through these episodes. We're now on to the chipping episode. Are you ready?
Great. I am ready, my friend. I am. Are you well today?
Mate. I am indeed.
Good man.
In today's episode of the Ceres Master Class, we're delving into the topic of chipping. This is a deep dive into chipping. And our goal is to help you, the listener, to get the best chips possible. Because with the best chips possible, customers keep coming back. Because, after all, you're a fish and chip shop. And David's right. He said in other episodes, you are likely going to sell more chips than anything else. Rarely does someone come in and say, oh, can I just have a sausage? But chances are someone's always going to come in and say, I want chips. So we want to help you get the best start to the day. And that is, you've peeled your lovely potatoes. And David, what do you do next?
So we've peeled our lovely potatoes, and we need to sort of now run through how we treat them, and we've sort of chipped them ready to go. So I think we need to discuss really what's the best way of doing that stuff.
So in my mind, we've done a lot of extensive research on this, and then all my years doing this at the shop. But obviously, for our chip preparation formula, we've had to devise a real formula. So we've got two methods, but in short, chip the potatoes into a chip barrel filled with water, agitate the chips to remove the starch, drain the water and repeat the process until the water runs clear. And then we always say, in a 10 litre bucket, add 10 grams of chip preparation formula, mix it thoroughly, and then keep repeating this process of filling up the barrel until your chips are covered. Let the chips soak in the solution 15 minutes, then drain it. But one important thing that I've sort of just very quickly skipped over there is removing the excess starch, which we're going to go into just down the line. And there's a reason why we say that, and the reason why we refer to it as excess starch. But there is a couple of methods that we have, and one method is the standard method. So this is the soaking method. The standard method is 1 gram per litre of water, and that's 1 gram of our solution or formula, and then let it soak for 15 minutes. And we think this is this is our recommended method. It's the best method for fish and chip shops and customers like, restaurants, pubs, street food, because, you're not in a rush that much. You're not a processor. You're not doing 2 ton a day. But we also do have the concentrated method, which is 5 grams per litre, and the soak time comes down to 90 seconds. But again, this is for processors, and they've got really tighter. Well, their operational controls are a lot tighter. So I don't think a fish and chip shop needs to do the concentrated method. I think they'd be absolutely fine with a 15-minute. So some of our busiest...
Can I just butt in there, Stella? I think just listening to you there about the standard and concentrated, I think you really have to have good processes in place, know what you're doing if you're using a concentrate like that. I think for your regular shop, a standard method is more than
look, I was just going to say, some of our busiest customers, they do a 15-minute soak and it's absolutely fine. Like, no one's... you're still peeling the one next to it, so you've still got time. And I think it's different if you have a different operational structure or you're a processor, but really, you shouldn't have to rush that process, in my opinion. So moving on.
So I think, Stel, I think this is where I'm going to learn so much, because this is the technical part of why we use or why we should treat chips.
So I think the difference is between me and you, David, and I think because we laugh about this and we've spent a lot of time doing this, is that you have real great intuition. And I think anybody listening to this will know that you probably know what I'm talking about technically, but it's intuitive. You've learned it over the years. You didn't know the science behind it, but you know that it's a problem and you've worked around it. You've been taught it. But what I want to sort of do is give a little bit of the science as well to sort of match your intuition. So for me...
Well, can I just say, this is where we differ, because I can't say
No, well, that is true. You said to me after, I think it was episode 1, you said, how many words do you think I'll get in the next one? But I'm usually the one that struggles with words, David. But in short, why should I treat chips? Well, firstly, you should, but here's a detailed analysis, essentially, of what happens with a potato. So when the protective skin of a potato is removed... there's enzymes called polyphenol oxidases, and they're basically PPOs. And once they get exposed to the air, these enzymes, they catalyze, and I don't know how to explain it, but there's an oxidization process, and the phenolic compounds naturally present in the potato, and that's just basically forming of brown pigments, and they're called melanins. And this enzymatic browning process causes peeled potatoes to darken. So, along with the browning, enzymic activity can also affect texture of the potatoes. If you leave a potato on the side for a while, you've seen it with older potatoes. They go a bit mushy, don't they? The starch feels weird. It's a bit odd on the fingers. And now, it takes a little bit of time for that to happen, but it is going to happen. And if you've listened to our previous episode about potatoes, they are a living thing, and we're almost keeping them alive with all these processes. So... this sort of treatment at the shop level is no different to farmers or growers spraying them to sort of stop the growing and then spraying them or fogging them in the room to keep them for longer. We just need to keep them for a day without their skin so we can fry them. So this doesn't just happen in potatoes. It happens in fruits and vegetables, most notably bananas, avocados, pears.
Bananas, yeah.
And actually, if you don't believe me, because I see it a lot in the groups where people don't believe in potato treatment, just cut a potato in half, cut an apple in half, cut a banana in half, and just come back to it in 20 minutes. You'll soon see. So, in short, forget all of that. The fact is, they start rotting, and that is it. You take a skin off a potato, you have got a very small window of opportunity. And on top of that, the whole point of these treatments, not just ours, but others, they're there to keep the potato dry. They're there so you can keep using it. It's not going to ruin your oil. It's going to give you a crispier chip. So, in my opinion, there's just so many more upsides than there is downsides.
Yeah, to me, I've heard a lot of people going, "Oh, it's this, it's that," And I've got a story a bit later about me and potato preparation, which I'd like to share with you all. I'm sure some of you will find it funny. But, I mean, I'm just going to I've listened to what Stel said, and it's, there's as I say, there's a lot of words there that I can't say. But the way I look at it, or the way I think of it, and the way I picture it in mind, what we're doing here is just stopping the potatoes oxidising, and that means them going a grey colour sort of thing. And the way I look at the actual potato preparation works, it sort of seals the potato, makes it go dry. It's almost like getting every potato and getting cling film and wrapping it up so it becomes nice and dry. It doesn't oxidise, so we're protecting it from the air. And, as I say, it fries quicker, and you're not introducing any water into the fat or oil.
Yeah. Well, at least reduced water. And I think because a potato is, 80-odd% water, as we discussed. So,
That's right.
For me, I get a lot of people challenge me, and they'll say, oh, well, you make natural batter mixes, etc. Chemicals are bad, and potato treatments are bad. But the fact is, you've got to understand that chemicals are not just industrial or synthetic substances. Water, oxygen, and all essential nutrients are chemicals. And the fact is, both natural and synthetic chemicals can be beneficial or harmful depending on their use, dosage, and context. For example, there are many medicines that are actually synthetic chemicals, and they save lives. Whereas there are some natural chemicals, like plant toxins, that can be severely deadly. So it's not as easy to say, chemicals bad. You've got to open your mind a little bit. And for me, the goal of the use of this antioxidant is to have great potatoes / great chips. So, you don't want inconsistency, you don't want bad chips, you don't want mouldy chips. You said you see grey chips. I've been to shops and I've seen purple peelings on the chipper because because the potatoes have just gone so far. It is a chemical treatment, but there is no downward effects and we're going to talk about this a lot. What we're going to say, David?
If it's used correctly. And when I get the time, I will get this story in about if it's used correctly.
So do you want to slip it in now?
Well, I will, yeah. So I sent Nick, when he joined the business, I sent Nick on an underpinning course at the Federation, and there were some great trainers there. And I said to him, look, Nick, go off there. And I thought, what a great thing. Go and get some underpinning knowledge, and he'll come back and go, yeah, Dad's doing it right and all that. And I did say to him, I said, Nick, off you pop. Have a great day, enjoy it. And at that time, it was a 3-day course. I said, please don't come back telling me how to run a fish and chip shop. You've only been here a short time sort of thing. And, of course, he came back on the afternoon about 5 o'clock, and I was in the shop, and he came to see me, and he said, have you had a good day? Yeah, great. And straight away he said, you're doing the chips wrong. I went, oh, Nick, look, what do you mean I'm doing the chips wrong? He said, well, you're doing it all totally wrong. The way you're doing it isn't the way you do it. I said, well, that's the way my dad taught me to do it. We all do it like that. Steve does it as his shop. We've always done it this way. So he just basically went and got the bottle, got my readers, sat me down and said, read it. And I think I got to block 2 and went, dear, he's right again. And basically, I wasn't doing correctly. I was just filling the barrel up with water, chucking what I thought was, I just poured it out of the bottle straight into it, gave it a bit of a run around on the top, thought I'd done it correctly, left it in for hours and hours, then drained it off 40 minutes before I need it, or even 10 minutes before I need it, and went and used them straight away. Of course, I looked at the instructions, and from that next day we started to do it the correct way, and I have to say, what a difference.
Now, it's maddening how many times we hear something just like that, isn't it? And you've obviously learned from that. But, we get many people that are messages and say, oh, there's a problem with your chip preparation formula. And I'm like, okay, tell me, what happened? Send me photos, break down the process. And they'll say something similar to what you just said. Well, I just did my chips, stuck it on top. Oh, did you measure it? No. And then you hear these famous words, I've always done it this way. And you'll be like, well, it's clearly got you by, but now it doesn't. So how about you do it this way? And, and there is a reason why companies that provide services go to the effort to research and build the descriptions and the methods, because they do work.
It's the correct way. And I think for me, the telling thing was a couple of the staff 2 days later, as the week went on, said, have we changed the chips? Or are we doing something different? Because they're so much better than what they were last week.
Yeah. And I bet your oils were lasting longer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, David, here, you mentioned that you used to leave them in water. What's your thoughts around that now?
Well, no, they want to be out of the water as quick as they can because you prep them, you leave them 15 minutes, let them go, because if not, the actual potato starts to suck in the water and they actually started to swell up. So I'm sure if anybody's left them in water, they'll find that they sometimes come back and the chips are out of the water. That means because the actual potato or the chip is drawing water in. What we don't want is loads of water in the chip. Just the water that should be there naturally. You
get that double skin, don't you? It feels weird, doesn't it? And another thing that I don't like is if you did that process in the summer and that water starts to get hot, because of the surface area of water compared to air, it almost cooks the chips a little bit, and then you almost get like a bit of a gelatinization. The starch that's in the product starts to go a bit weird as well.
Yeah, you get like soaps on the top.
And so for me, I just think the way that we recommend it and the way that the other ones that you might use a different formula to ours, just follow what it says on the back. Like, you don't know better than a scientist. You don't know better than a chemist. It's just a fact. Well,
how many times do you build a wardrobe and it goes wrong because you haven't read the instructions?
We've all done it. We've all done it.
Same thing, isn't it? Well, it's not. Yeah. It's more or less the same thing. The instructions are there for a reason. Follow them to what they say, and this has been trialled by the owners of whoever made the potato preparation product. They've put so much effort and time into this that it is the way you do it, and there's no way of going off piste on it. If that's what it says, please follow the rules.
And one thing that I found as well is that leaving, and you mentioned this to some degree, but it's a scientific fact that leaving chips or potatoes in water with no skin on, with or without solution for a long period of time, and that could be anything over half an hour. When I say longer than it needs to be, it does cause flavour loss, and they will taste less potatoey. So obviously,
because if you remember us talking about dry matter, the more water content, they become tasteless, soggy.
So imagine going through step 1 of our masterclass, step 2 of our masterclass, and then thinking, well, you know what? On step 3, I'm going to ignore treatment. I'm just going to leave them in water. You've actually almost made that process null and void. You've sort of ignored it to some degree. And, so for me, I just think a dry chip is where you want to be. It's going to give you better recovery on your fryers. It's going to give you a tastier product, fluffier on the inside, crispier on the outside. So, and also, the whole point of treatment is to get you to a point where you've got less challenges to deal with. That's the whole point of using an antioxidant. So you want to have consistency, but leaving them in water, for me, I think it gives you almost all the negatives in one go. So, that's sort of my opinion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I really agree with you on that.
So, let's not go on too much about that, but ideally, no, you should not be leaving them in water until you need them. So
talking about water, Stel, is there a way to chip but using less water?
Yes, and we are going to be discussing this on our website a bit more, and we'll write some guides. But essentially, what you can do is... Right, so I'll give you a bit of backstory. A few years ago, there was a chap called Matthew Silk. Did you know Matthew?
I didn't actually meet Matthew. I heard a lot about him, but obviously, a lot of people know Tracy Poskett, who was in business with Matthew, and they won Bishop of the Year together. Is a really, really good friend of mine. In fact, I look up to her very much, and she's really, really.
I don't know who developed the idea between them two, but it happened there, and it was at 149 in Bridlington. So they'd won Fish and Chips with the Year, and we were supplying them with Yorkshire batter at the time. And I went there to have a look, and I saw all these orange lobster baskets, and I was like, "What are you doing with these?" And he said so, and he showed me his method of making chips. And this was a very busy site. It was busy before they'd won. It was busier after they'd won. And essentially, what you do is you could you could either have the lobster basket in a barrel of water underneath the chipper, or just chip directly into a lobster basket, and then you put it into the water, you give it a really good shake, clean water, nothing in it, give it a really good agitation, and then the starch leaves through the sides of the basket and falls to the bottom, because starch is heavier, so it would fall to the bottom, it will sink. And then you'd get that one, leave it for a second, and then you'd dunk it in your potato preparation formula for 15 minutes or 90 seconds, depending what you're doing, and then you'd carry on. And what you're doing is you've got one barrel of water for the de-starching, and then you've got one barrel of water for the treatment. So you're not constantly, starching, plugging, depugging, filling up. So you can use a lot less water doing that. I quite like this method. I never did it at my shop because I was out of my dad's fish and chip shops by that point, but I definitely saw the benefit of it massively. Is it something you ever did, David?
Yeah, when we get further down the line on the next masterclass, you'll understand where I am now. But yeah, I did. Yeah. Somewhere somebody showed me it. I can't remember who it was. Somebody said, "Have you ever thought about doing it this way?" And I actually started to use that method. With the lobster baskets, big orange things, and we had a couple of barrels of water, so we had one barrel of water to get it off, and then we put it in another one just to double check, and then into the normal barrel. But yeah, I did it that way at the end, and if you look at some of our early videos that are on YouTube, you'll actually see us doing it.
Yeah.
You'll actually see us using that.
And
method.
ultimately, if you use 40% less water, that's a huge difference. Well, again, it all depends whether you're on a meter or not. But the point is, it is a more efficient process anyway. I think it is. Yeah. So if you're not on a meter, there's still benefits.
Big thing for me, Stel, is you need to make sure you've got that starch up.
No, that is a really important thing. Just de-starching.
So, Stel, you're the scientist among us, really. You understand how it all works. When we use the potato preparation, a lot of people worry, is there any residue left on the chip?
Well, it's a yes and no answer. So if you follow all the manufacturer's guidelines and your chips are treated accordingly and dry, at that point, if you were to lick a chip, the answer is yes. You would taste it. It would leave a weird sort of flavour in your mouth. However, if you've got hot oil and then you throw your dry chips in, and that's the key word, dry, the preparation formula will just evaporate and go with the steam. So when you eat the chip, there's nothing there, absolutely nothing there. So yeah, I think
this is where people get confused and say they don't like it. It's because they probably used to do it like I did and actually don't follow the rules. So yeah, going back to when we said like I used to do, doing it incorrectly, a lot of people may overtreat it, and then this is why you do get a residue of taste. If you actually follow the correct proportions and measurements, then you're never going to have that taste of that residue.
Yeah, 100%. And look, a lot of large-scale potato processors still treat their chips, and then and if you think they've got everything, the science is there. They've got everything. They've got the big, for example, people don't realise this, but the likes of Karemco and Florigo, they actually have a different side of their business, which is making large, very large, the size of my factory, French fry lines or chip lines or whatever, potato peeling lines. They're ridiculously massive. And even they would have a treatment in place because you just want to eliminate any negative downside. So,
going back to those two companies, the fish and chip industry is still important to them.
Yeah.
But the actual HQ, they do all sorts of other things for the industry.
Absolutely.
And work far wider than what fish and chips is.
Yeah. So I'd say your biggest worry, if you're worried about residue left on chips, is if you're eating them raw, but you're not. So nothing to fear in that respect.
So just after the residue then, Stel, the other thing is, where should you store it? Where should you store this chip preparation formula?
So I'm a bit obsessive. So again, I think, anything that's got hazardous label, or whether it's a chemical, whatever it is, it could be an ingredient like bicarbonate of soda. I like everything to go in a safe place. So for me, antioxidants, potato antioxidants especially, because they're very high in sulfur dioxide gas. Well, they can release it when they're exposed to water or moisture. So you want it in a very dry place. You just don't want it in a potato room. You know, I've seen it where people don't screw the bottles up. People's hands are wet. They're unscrewing it with their wet hands. Water goes in. And then it gasses off. And well before my time, you might remember, but there was, you know, the old-fashioned potato treatments, like the dry white liquid, and they were in glass bottles. And, you know, you talk to any old-timer, like people like before like my dad, well, like you or my dad or people before that, when one of those glass bottles broke, you shot out the room pretty fast. So the sulfur dioxide...
Or our chip guy that used to work with Dad used to say to me, David, come and have a smell of this.
Yeah.
Very dangerous.
But it is, and you see now that it's not a game. People don't mess with that no more. And I think, you know, and these antioxidants are highly hygroscopic. So that means that just naturally they absorb moisture from the air. So if they're absorbing moisture from the air and they start reacting, you're going to get a sulfur dioxide kicking off. And also sodium bisulfate, and you know it's not nice. You know it stinks, and it's a very irritating odor. So you know, in my opinion, keep it in a dry place. Go to it, or if you know that you need X amount, go measure it out before you need it. You know, shops aren't 7,000, 10,000 square foot. You can walk 10 steps to another room to just get what you need and walk back to it. But leaving it in the potato room, how many times have I seen it where someone's undone the lid, put it on a shelf above them, it's then fell in into the barrel of water. We've all done it, and it just ruins your day, you know.
Yeah, and just in a dry room stops it going clumpy. Keep it as dry as you can.
Yeah.
The other thing, going back to, you know, when you talked about the release of sulfur dioxide and that, and we mix it in a certain amount of water, is it always a good idea to put... So let's say you've got 10 litres. Maybe put a couple of litres in first. Put your mix in. Give it a whisk about, and then top up. And that might just not get. You might not just get a.
So what you're saying
dioxide.
Is, well, I suppose what you're saying is if you've got an empty barrel and it's at the bottom, your strongest solution goes at the bottom, and then you keep thinning it out with normal water. Is that what you're saying?
No. What I meant is if you have a 10-litre bucket, you'd put so much in to start with.
Yeah.
Put your measurement in, give it a whisk so it dissolves it, and then top it up.
Yeah, you can do. I think there's lots of ways to do it.
Lots of ways.
Yeah,
isn't there?
I think if you had a 10-litre bucket and you added your 10 grams,
you'd be fine.
You could argue you've got more liquid, so less gassing off. Again, I think in the moment it's what you do best, but do it the same way every time. And listening to this, you know, people will say, "Oh, they're really obsessing over how you use it," but the fact is, if you've got a set methodology, you know, it means that everyone's going to get on really well with it. And also, you know, I've seen it where people are using real strong chemicals and they've got no gloves, no mask, no nothing. They've got rashes on their arms. These are headaches that are going to come and bite us on the bum later on. So, for me, respect the ingredient, whatever it is. You know, we could be talking about chili powder. Respect the ingredient. You know, it needs to be treated properly. So I think, like you said, keep it in another room. And it's it does stop it going clumpy. Although ours has a flow aid, but again, if it gets wet, then that flow aid's not going to do much either.
Okay.
So
forget what I said then, because.
Well, what did you say?
Well, about putting a bit of water in a bucket and then...
No, because...
Just forget
again, just do what works for you. Just no, I think that's the key thing to people. If they want to be extra safe, go in it slow. But just do what works for you, but make sure it's safe. But I think for me, the key thing is just keep that product away from the wet room, you know? What I wanted to ask you, David, again, this is a bit more hands-on, and we've alluded to it a little bit, but does any form of chip preparation formula ruin frying oil?
No, if it is used correctly. Now, a big yes if not. So let's go, if you wonder with the chip preparation formula, so you don't put enough on, that won't dry the chip. So then you've got wet chips going into your oil, which will break it down. If you do the formula of the chip preparation, then you'll have too much residue, and when you come to fry it, it actually all won't sort of evaporate into the steam. So again, that will have a detrimental effect on your oil. So going back to what we've been going on and repeating all the time, if used correctly, it will not destroy or ruin your fat.
I think it's fair to say, in actual fact, treated chips have the opposite effect. They prolong frying oil.
They do, actually, because they're stopping the water going in.
Yeah. I think one thing I saw in Scotland a few years ago is that a lot of fryers in Scotland don't like treating their chips. They like their chips just sitting in water. And they have these really big... Oh, they're huge. They're basically like a bucket with a huge arm. Like, they're huge. And they'd get them, and they'd just get their chips out. Like, we're talking like 15 kilos at a time. And then they'd just let it drain for like a second or two, and literally just drop it into the chip pan, and you just hear the screaming coming out of the chip pan. And again, this is where the oils were a lot more robust back in the day. They were hydrogenated. People are using highly saturated fats. I'm not.
Don't say, Stel, if they're done correctly, when you put the chips in, you shouldn't hear anything.
I guess you'll hear a little bit of a sizzle. You're always going to hear a sizzle, but you're not going to hear the water noise. That's ideally, you don't want the extreme screaming noise. Yeah. I don't know how to categorise it, but anyone that's heard water go into a fryer, you just know, don't you? Everyone does that funny face. We all know. What would you do with leftover treated chips at the end of a shift?
Well, again, it's like, it's about me and your diary. It starts with, what do you need for a Tuesday night? What do you need for a Friday? Maybe just trying to keep that as tight as possible, so you've always got sort of fresh most of the day and the next day. Now, I know we do have nights when, for some reason, you're down quite a bit and there's no reason why, and the next night might be even more busier. But I think, ideally you keep them out of water and probably put them in the fridge if you can. Cover them up and put them in the fridge. That's what I would do.
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Stel.
I
know some people put them in the fridge and just cover them with water, but I think the best thing to do with treated chips is to have as little left as possible, so that, again, comes to your diary and obviously working with how you work, and just put them in the fridge.
And like you say, sometimes you can be thrown, because, let's face it, I think a lot of people allude to the fact that pre-COVID, or let's say 10 years ago, you knew how a week was going to go. You knew how the year was going to go. January, February, March, quiet. Easter onwards, it was sort of going to get better and better all the way to December. And you also knew that Monday would be quiet, Tuesday would be quiet, Wednesday would be a bit better, Thursday, Friday, and Friday, well good. Saturday, a bit worse than a Friday, let's say. And I'm just talking generally here. Whereas now I hear from a lot of people, I don't know why, Tuesday was dead, but Wednesday was busy. So if this sort of thing happens, it's going to throw you off a little bit. So I would personally... again, it all depends how many you've got. But if you've got roughly 20 kilos, I'd probably black bag them, or bag them, buy some poly bags off Amazon or your packaging supplier. Obviously, we just had black bags then. So then I'd put them in there and I'd press it down, all the way down, get all the air out, tie a knot, put it in the fridge. If I had like a full barrel's worth, then I think one option for me would be maybe put a damp towel over them and then cling film the top. Just to sort of try and block out as much air as possible. But if you've got a walk-in fridge, put them in there, or a cool room. I think the key thing is cool room as well, because I think the worst thing is when you've got lots of chips left over and it's summer, because they will stink. Maybe at that point you're just better off binning them, because
they're not going to be great the next day.
No.
But I think, and you can actually buy buckets that hold quite a lot of chips as well with lids on. I've got these like white buckets with lids on.
Oh yeah, I've seen the ones.
And we can put them in that, and they stack nicely, and they're ready to go the next day.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm not a big fan of putting them back into water after they've been treated.
No,
I just think
there's no need to.
No.
Once you've treated them, and if you've kept them, if you've let them in the air open and left them outside all night, they're not going to be, whether you've treated them or not, they're not going to be in a great state. So I think, as Stel quite rightly says, getting them as cold as you can. If you haven't got the room in your fridge or anything like that, then cover them up, with a wet tea towel, cover them and try and get them as cold as possible. And maybe if you have got a full barrel, split it into two.
Yes, good point. Yeah, great point that is, David.
Yeah.
And look, and again, you just have to accept that sometimes there's going to be losses, and you've just got to try and mitigate them. So David is right. If you've got a bit of a diary and you know that on a Tuesday you've got to do 8 sacks, then doing 8 isn't going to be a huge risk. You know, doing 12 because you forgot or your staff member decided to do 12, that's going to probably annoy you somewhat, especially the next day when some of them need binning.
Absolutely. If we go back to the very start, if we're rumbling at the right time and we're saving bags rather than putting bags down the drain, you know, it all adds up, doesn't it? You know,
Yeah.
And you can maybe afford to lose that. And I think at the end of the day, you've got to decide: would I eat these chips? Am I proud of these chips going out today? I made them yesterday. I've got 10 kilos left. 2 or 3 pans left. Are they good enough to go out, or is that going to be detrimental to my business?
Well,
that is your call.
Well, and again, it goes back to there's a difference between the price of something and the cost of use. So you might think, oh, I'm not throwing away £20 worth of potatoes, but if you annoy 20 customers, they're not coming back. So that's going to cost you more in the long run. Or you've got to comp them, free food, free meal, and then a discount off their next meal. You know, your customers are spending their hard-earned money in the business, so don't risk it, in my opinion. So, yeah, I'd back up David on that one.
Do you know something, Stella? I did a course on customer service, and the numbers are staggering. That if somebody gets a bad nail, they will tell roughly around 28 people.
Wow.
And then those people will tell maybe half of that. And some people will say you're rubbish, and they've never even been to you because they've heard that through. So you've also got to think, like Stella says, is it worth that risk?
Yeah. And imagine, many will want to say, you know what, I need to save the money, the bills are expensive, or, but don't rob Peter to pay Paul. That's a pattern that's going to keep coming back. Do not do that.
Those customers need to keep coming back constantly.
Exactly.
Not just every 6 months.
Yeah. So, David, so early on we alluded or we mentioned reducing excess starch, not starch, excess starch. And the reason why we call it excess starch is because, like we mentioned in episode 1 of the Masterclass, a potato is pretty much all starch with some water. So you can't get rid of all starch because you'd be left with a pile of water. So, David, why is reducing excess starch important to you, mate?
Well, I think it's really, really important to get that starch out. You don't want the starch left, because if you don't stir them, they'll clump together. So then you'll be getting chips that aren't cooked properly. There'll be some that aren't and some that aren't, that are still undercooked. Also, if you don't get the starch off, you'll see that they brown a bit quicker, and a lot of it will be an uneven fry. Plus, when they're in the top box or in your holding box for your chips, the starch will still brown. So what I'm trying to say to you guys is really that the starch is a form of sugar. Mm-hmm. And that will create a sweetness as well, which is probably what you don't want. It'll also create a fattier product. The starch will help break your fat down. So there's lots of reasons why you should get rid of the starch. So that's why I would always recommend having a starch testing kit in. Yeah. But if you remember going back to the merchants, a lot of merchants now will tell you what the starch is, what the fry colour is, because they do all this for you, and that's when you know you've got a really good supply coming through. But I would always have one in, just in case you just want to check for your own peace of mind. Yeah,
and other fast food companies are obsessed about this. So if you look at Five Guys, they have a special sort of sink/bath where they put their hand-cut fries in, and then it's got like a wheel with brushes on it, and it moves all their chips around, and then it goes cloudy, so they pull the plug, and then they fill it up with water again, and they start again. And they probably do it 3 times. And McDonald's, before they started having their fries frozen, they did exactly the same thing on site. They'd have the chips in a bath, or fries, shall I say, and they would de-starch. And again, it's so important. So yeah.
I mean, I know we've said a few different methods of maybe where you could do it in preparation, but the ideal thing is have a barrel with a starch journey in the bottom. You keep running that water through till it's completely crystal clear, and you can put your hand under it and actually see your fingerprints through it, and it's like almost like a magnifying glass. That's when you know you've got as much starch off as you can.
Yeah, and I must admit, David, I did not know about the terminology excess starch. I just assumed, like everybody else, you take a bit of starch off, take all the starch off. Well, you can't. It's impossible to take all the starch off. You're just taking away what's not needed, or at least as much as you can of the excess starch.
And then using the preparation formula, that sort of seals it all up for you, and then you get a nice dry chip, and off you go. Yeah. But that isn't scientifically probably right, but that's just
that's so true. And again, the science meets the real world application every day. So, David, if you get a bad batch of high sugar potatoes or high starch potatoes, or they've been exposed to cold, what are you doing? What's your thought process at work?
Well, because you've got a great relationship with your supplier, you probably have your starch kit, just test it yourself, and then you get in touch with your supplier and say, this is what's happening. Can you get another supply into me? At the end of the day, 1 minute, 1 hour in a fish and chop shop selling any product that's not what you normally sell isn't going to do you any favours. Yeah. So again, I would definitely be asking to be replaced.
I'd also listen back to the last episode and also go back and look at how you can make your potato storage room better, fit for purpose. If they're dipping in temperature in the winter, your chips are going to fry dark. They're going to have an increased sugar content. And the fact is, there isn't a corrective chemical to fix this. People think there is, but there isn't. Once the damage is in, you can't get that out. So it's really important to understand that. And then also, if you've got higher sugar in the chips, when we're going to talk about this down the line, you're going to have more acrylamide. Which I don't think, we'll go into acrylamide shortly, but if you follow the rules here, you won't have a problem there. But let's say your merchant can't get out fast enough. There might be a day away. You're probably going to have to use some of those chips. One thing I've always done in the past, I don't know if you have, David, but it's hot water treatment.
Yeah.
And you just fill your barrels up with hot water with your chips, and then empty it and then treat it, and what happens is it pauses the problem. It stops it from getting any worse. But again, it will remove some of the sugar and it gets rid of some of the starch, but it's not a full-time corrective measure. And actually, if you are using that as a full-time corrective measure, just pay more for bare chips, because hot water's not cheap either, is it?
It's not ideal. It's not an ideal, and as Stel says, it's a stopgap. It's to stop that problem for a couple of days. You can work with them. But, if I got something like that and I was frying away, I just sit there and I'm just not proud of what I'm doing, and it upsets me all day. You're thinking, this isn't really what we normally serve, and it's just not a good feeling to have that. No, so,
exactly.
I think, it's a stopgap, but just making sure that you can get them returned. And again, when you get in your supply, and maybe this is the question you should ask, is, if I get a bad batch, what's the policy on returns?
Yeah. No, exactly. So, David, one common question that always comes up is, okay, I'll treat them, but what if I then also leave them in water? So before we touched on just leaving them in water with no treatment, what about treating and leaving in water?
Well, again, it's what you shouldn't do. If you treat them and just leave them in water, they're just going to over preparation. They're just going to over-treat, and again, they're going to come out quite sort of, I don't know what the word is still, they come quite sort of spongy, don't they?
Bendy, almost bendy, aren't they? Yeah.
Bendy and spongy, and again, when you fry them, they become quite tough. You can almost they've got sharp edges, and I think that it's just, again, they're not a great product.
Yeah. And then
Would you agree with me that?
No, I'd agree with that. They definitely have that bendiness, Yeah. So, question for you, David, can I use chip preparation formula, or any chip preparation formula, can I use it my way?
Well, if your way is what it says on the instructions, definitely.
But is that a long way of saying no?
If it doesn't, if you miss out 2 and 3 on the instructions, no, you can't. Yeah. Simple.
Yeah. Well, I think from my point of view as a manufacturer of something, of anything, is we've gone through that process, and it's to give you the best results of something, whether it's treating chips, whether it's making curry sauce, whether it's, making batter. So if people are just playing fast and loose and then saying, well, it's your fault, something doesn't work, it's hard for us to recreate those issues. So for me, it's just a big no.
And how do you handle that then, Stel? If you get somebody, would you actually go visit?
Yeah, it depends. So firstly, we're messaging and trying to find out what the issue is, photos, evidence, explain, tell us everything that you're doing, and then we try and isolate the issue. And then if we have to go, we'll go. That's absolutely fine. But, for us, if someone's decided to go off track and do something themselves, we have to explain there is going to be an element of risk there. It's just what happens, and I think car manufacturers are similar, except for they will cancel your warranty. But, if you go and put a turbo on your car and bigger wheels, and then you say to Toyota, well, it's not working the same. Well, it's not the same thing anymore, is it?
Does it quite corner the same?
No, exactly. I want to check my engine on the warranty. Well, you've put a turbo on it, you've had this done, you've had that done. So, and I know it's a gross exaggeration, but the point's the same. So
there's a theme, isn't there, in what we're talking about?
No, exactly.
Read the instructions.
Yeah.
It's like as you say, curry sauce. Read it. If it says, 2 kilos to 5 litres, they've done all the tests on it for days and weeks and months to get the best yield out of it and get the best flavour. That's what you do. Yeah.
No, exactly. And that is the key thing here. And also, if you go it alone, you've just got to understand that it may work and it may be fine, but when it doesn't work, that's not our fault. Like, that's the fault of the fact that you're doing it freestyling. So, and you just have to accept there's a bit of risk there.
It'll always catch you out, Stel.
Exactly.
I don't care what you say. If you don't do it correct, it'll always catch you out someday. And every day's important, but it'll always be a busy day.
Yeah. So what if a shop owner wanted to peel the potatoes and then wash them, eye them, and then treat the potatoes, then pull the plug, dry them, and then chip them as they go along? What's your thoughts there, David?
You can do it. It is available to do that way, isn't it? It does give you a leeway to do that. But I just always think that if you've got some peeled potatoes and then you're ready to treat them, it's not doing what it's supposed to do. The whole idea of using the preparation solution is to get them dried and stop them oxidating. Yeah. Whereas if you're peeling them and leaving them in water and then chipping them as you go, you're just going to be adding a lot of water, a lot of starch, or if you are rinsing it off, there's going to be even more water. I think there's no harm in having, let's say, half a bag just in standby, ready to go. But again, if you've got them left the next day, they could have, like what we talked about, them suds, when it sort of ferments a little bit. And what I would do with that is I would just put them in the peeler for another 10 seconds again and just freshen them up. Yeah, you're going to take a bit more of it, but you're basically back to a new potato again, almost.
For me...
Does that answer that?
Yeah, no, it does, yeah. I think on the flip side is I just don't think it's optimal. I think we discussed this earlier in preparation. We said the word preparation a million times, but it's true. For me, a potato is going to carry a lot of moisture because it's still whole. And when you chip it, it exposes a lot more of the surface area. So with this increased surface area, you lose moisture through evaporation. So you do have a drier chip. A chip will always be drier than potatoes. So I get where you're coming from, and I think it is an option if you just wanted to knock some up quickly, running behind or whatever. But I think if you just did it properly, and then at the end of the shift, black bag them or poly bag them, get as much air out as possible, lob them in the fridge, you should be fine. And if you only did half a bag, you haven't got that many anyway. Yeah. So...
I think when we first started off, we discussed, didn't we, about being organised.
Yes.
Chip as you go, get it all ready, get how many bags it is you need that day, get them all ready to go, get one barrel done, get that treated, 15 minutes, and then you get onto your next barrel, 15 minutes, and then as you start pulling them out. Another little tip, when you're timing that 15 minutes, put the timer in your pocket. Because there'll be so many times that you'll walk out the room and then suddenly remember an hour later that you didn't pull the plug out.
Yeah, it's true. You just left them.
It's life. So put a timer in your pocket.
Yeah. And again, we were talking in the last episode about washing down. And, I remember we'd just hose down the machine completely. But actually, in actual fact, it's okay to hose down the machine, the chipper, and all your equipment. But again, sanitize, because all that water and the starch and the sugars and the fibres, they're just going to create bacteria and fungal growth. So
I'm sure when you wash chippers down and you go back when it's dried, there's still residue there.
Mm-hmm.
I know it is.
Yeah.
So just by washing with a hose pipe, doesn't do the job.
No, and you've got to take the wheel out, take the whole lot out, take the lid off. My dad was a bit obsessive about this. Like once a week, after cleaning down properly after every use, once a week he'd put all the bits, so the wheel, the top bit, and the hopper bit, all of it, the knife block in bleachy water, and leave it overnight. Because you just want to make sure. How many times do you see the knife blocks and the white is yellowy, because that's the starch and it's converting to sugar, and then the bacteria eats at it and it goes dirty. So your blades ain't going to last very long either if you're just letting all that grime sit in there.
Absolutely.
All right. So
great.
Similar question to the last one: would you have a spare chipper?
Yeah. If you've got the space, if you've got the money to do it, if it goes down, but going back to what we said, if something happens, you've got a good supplier or a good connection where you can get a spare one. I'm a great believer in talking to other fish and chip shops.
I was thinking this actually when you said that. Yeah.
Because when I talk about something else later in the next episode, it's nice to have a network with other shops, because they'll help you out. It's not like years ago where you had a fish and chip shop and I'm not talking to him because he's got a fish and chip shop, as though it was some big secret society and they didn't want to sell any secrets that knew you. I think having a network of people within your area and getting on with them and saying, look, shall we set this up? If it happens to me or something happens to you, we can help each other out. They're not going to say no. They're not going to say no. And you might never need them and they might never need you. But it's a reality thing that you will. And I think if you've got a bit of help like that, it's brilliant. And it just brings you closer together and you've got somebody to talk to that's going through the same thing. You're not pinching anybody's customers.
Yeah.
It's just nice to have that relationship because you've got a lot in common.
Yeah.
You've got a lot in common with people. And so you should talk about that and it just opening your doors to people.
What are you doing with scrappy chippy bits from the chipper? You just let them go in and then sorting them? Are you taking them out in the fryer?
Some people, I think that's if you're doing your own production, I think that's the only way you can do it.
Yeah.
You're going to be there all day, aren't you, taking your scrappy bits out, or you're going to have a piece of machinery to do that, so that's not feasible. So, again, you get a lot of customers who love them scrappy bits, don't you? Mm. So, again, it all depends what your customers are expecting, what they're used to. And do you is your thoughts, I want them scrappy bits out, or do you like them in? There's no right or wrong, I don't think.
No, I don't think so. And I think if you're float frying, it's easy to take them out because they sort of bunch in the corner, don't they? They also, yeah. So that's easy to take out. And again, you can either leave them or take them out. I guess it all depends. Like you said, David, if you want them, keep them, and if you don't, get rid of them. But if they're too small, then they're going to burn and go horrible anyway. So you need to get them out of the fryer at some point.
Yeah.
One thing we wanted to touch on, do you think, David, that people have to worry about acrylamide?
Well, they have to know about it, that's for certain, because I know for a fact that a lot of EHO officers around the country are actually buying chips, taking it away and testing it, and then probably asking you, and it could be asking your front of house, what's acrylamide?
Yeah. And
if you don't know, you're in big trouble.
So the good thing is we've written quite a lot about this, and I think, again, you don't have to worry, but you need to know. So for those that don't know, acrylamide is a chemical compound that forms naturally, naturally in high carbohydrate foods. So if you're baking, frying, roasting, you get it from like the sugars that burn. It's the Maillard reaction. And it's going to burn. It's technically what makes things taste nice, isn't it, David? You think, oh, yeah, I like that. And so, but the good thing is that chips, so if you think what's the average chip in the industry, we're not spoken about chip sizes because we're saving that for the next episode, or the one after that maybe, but if you think chips in the fish and chip industry on average 14 by 17.
Something like that,
yeah. Well, a French fries from McDonald's is 4 by 4.
Yeah.
So that's got a lot more surface area in a fryer, and the acrylamide formation, because of the Maillard reaction, it's a lot more aggressive. The key thing that we need to remember is, though, yes, it's a carcinogen. However, you have to eat a lot of fries, a lot of crisps. You have to eat.
But can you imagine if that had got out in some sort of tabloid and said that chips give you cancer?
Well, they tried. I think they've tried.
Have they?
Yeah, a few years ago they tried. And, but the fact is, you'd probably have to eat 14 kilos of McDonald's French fries in one sitting to even get a reaction, let alone cancer. Yeah, so, now what people don't think about is that the biggest, or one of the biggest causes of naturally occurring acrylamide is filter coffee, because you make the coffee and then they freeze it, but before it was heat treated and it would burn the coffee. Yeah. So we're going to talk about it in and out, but we have got articles on it on the Ceres website. It's nothing you have to worry about, especially if you follow what it says on the bottle of preparation treatment.
So can I give you my take on that then, Stel?
Go on, mate.
So if anybody ever comes in, this is what I would say to them. I would say, right, yeah, totally understand what acrylamide is. Chips, potatoes at the highest, but it is from starch. So in our production, we chip the potatoes, we try and rinse as much starch off as we can. Then we actually use a preparation formula, and then we cook them to a golden colour. Bingo. And I think that makes you've got an understanding then of what you're doing. And I think anybody who was asking you questions would say, yeah, these guys know what they're on about.
I think it's good to know, but I'd be hard-pressed if a customer can even talk about acrylamide without being rude. And also, there are bigger issues, and we're going to talk about those bigger issues in other chapters. The fact is, I wouldn't worry about this. If you're following the processes we've explained here, or whoever's trained you properly, if you're following those methods from your antioxidants, you are going to be absolutely fine. So, but we will touch on it in future episodes as well.
And another good one, Stel, is go on the FSA website, Food Standard A website. There's loads of little videos there, and if you just put acrylamide in, it'll tell you all about it.
Exactly.
You do need to know, as an operator, you do need to know about it.
Oh yeah, I think just because we have no cause to worry doesn't mean you need to ignore it. So, yeah. But David, I think we've gone through another deep session, and hopefully we're getting close to sort of ending this chapter on chips essentially and potatoes. So we are going to be arranging some experts to be joining us, aren't we?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I've got a few friends of mine, some from the crisping industry actually, which I think that would be interesting for people to hear.
I think so.
And we're just going to get them arranged with people to be on, and again, just see their side of it and what problems they have, and probably put us right on a few things.
Yeah.
So looking forward to that very much.
Likewise. Thank you, David. And if any listeners, like we say always, if you've got any questions, throw them into us, because we'll pile them up ready for our housekeeping episode.
Okay, thanks everybody.